Are you bored, tired, and looking for someone to have a conversation with? Are you a loser who lacks the necessary social skills to keep a conversation going? Well, in that case, you should try creating simple NPC dialogue. It's all the fun of talking to real people, but without all that extra baggage that real people bring to the table. Yes, Joe, following this tutorial, you'll be able to have your NPCs have their very own dialogue. So you can keep talking to them until you've completely lost your mind. We make it easy to add new lines of dialogue appear in a linear order. But how does it work? Using our patent pending, copyright pending, trademark pending formula, we take a blueprint that isn't our player, create an event that fires every time our player character overlaps with it. When that event fires, we have our dialogue appear on screen. And that dialogue is linked to our special function that changes the text based on what we set it to in the viewport. So you'll have hours of fun cycling dialogue all year round. This is as simple as dialogue gets. Here to talk more about it is our partner, Joe Von D.
Thanks for passing the torch over, narrator. I'm Joe Von D. Thanks for tuning into this tutorial. We're going to start the Simple Dialogue project with a basic third-person character template. You know me, I love this project. Let's go ahead and start next, give it a simple name. We're not going to need any of the starter content or any of that, but might as well import it. Alright, so we have our third-person template project locked and loaded. Let's go ahead and open the source panel. And we're going to need something besides our player character. In fact, I'm going to rename this to player. That way we know that that blueprint is going to be the player that we are in the level. And instead of creating a whole new blueprint from scratch, let's go ahead and just duplicate our player. So we have an NPC blueprint. Now, like the commercial said, we're just going to have our third-person character blueprint overlap with our NPC blueprint and create some dialogue. Let's create some visual differences between them. We can make our NPC a different color just by changing the materials on the mesh. You can see the default materials are applied to this skeletal mesh. We can go ahead and click on here, and since we imported the starter content, we can change that to just about anything we want. And we've applied some water materials to him. Now he's going to look quite a bit different in the viewport from our regular player. The first thing we should do is add an interaction radius to our player. That way we know when we're in and out of range to interact with things. If you've watched my Grand Theft Auto 5 vehicle tutorial about possession and unpossession, this should come as no surprise to you, but we are going to use a capsule component in order to determine when we're overlapping and when we're not overlapping. You're going to want this capsule to extend pretty far. This is going to be our range that we can interact with things. So we'll go ahead and just flip that in the y-axis, so when we extend it, it'll reach forward and backwards. We don't really want to interact with things behind us though, so let's go ahead and move this that way it's only in front of us. Now we'll set up the event. Whenever we overlap with our NPC blueprint, we can go ahead and begin our dialogue. We'll use these events on the details panel. Click on plus for begin overlap, and we're also going to want one more to end the overlap as well. So we have two events on here whenever we begin overlapping, and another event whenever we end overlapping with that NPC blueprint. Let's go ahead and make sure that whatever we are overlapping with is our NPC blueprint. So we're just going to cast to the NPC blueprint. But our NPC blueprint doesn't have any text available. So we are just going to go to that NPC. Under the variables, we do want him to say some text. So we'll set up some text for him to say. We'll just call this dialogue. We can change the default value of what he says here under default value, just hello, I am an NPC. And we'll do something really quickly just so we know that we're overlapping and casting to our NPC. We're just going to print string that dialogue onto the viewport. We're going to get dialogue, and we'll print that right onto the viewport every single time we interact. So let's turn over. You can see whenever we begin overlapping, it's going to say that right on the top left of the viewport. Nice and easy. So we're getting the job done. The dialogue is being shown on screen, but let's say we have two NPCs in the scene and we want them to say two different things. How do we get that done? Because if we play, we'll see that both of them are saying the exact same thing. Well, I want to introduce a new mechanic to you that has to do with variables. This is going to be called instance editable variable. Whenever you create a variable, you do have multiple options in the details panel. This option that we're going to use is called instance editable. If you click that option, it's going to be set to true, and if you compile and save and go to your viewport with your two different NPC blueprints, you can set their dialogue now in the details panel. So I want the one that's closer to me to say I am closer to you, and the one that's further away from me, I can say I am further away from you. And now that these two variables have been set in the viewport, if I go near this one, he'll say I am closer to you, and the one further away will say I am further away from you. Now, instance editable variables can make creating a game much faster, especially if you're creating the blueprints and someone else is implementing them in levels. It allows them to quickly implement different dialogues for different NPCs. You can also set it up for different items to be sold for different merchants, different drop rates for different random encounters, etc. and etc. As long as you're setting it up properly in the viewport, they should be able to edit it very quickly in the details panel. Instance editable variables are very helpful when working in teams and also when speeding up projects. So we have unique dialogue for both of our NPCs in the level, but what if we wanted to look just a little bit nicer? Well, the easiest way to do that is to use something called a widget. So if we right-click on the content browser, go to User Interface, and click on a widget blueprint, here in this blueprint we can design what we want our dialogue to look like. So we're just going to call this dialogue widget. If we open the dialogue widget, we'll see right now it's completely empty. The only thing we have is a canvas panel where you can go ahead and put a bunch of different components from the palette. We're going to need two, so we'll need a border to surround our dialogue, and then we'll need some text to go inside of the border. Now when you add the text to the canvas panel, you do want to make sure that it's parented to the border, and it'll be underneath the border slightly offset. That way when we move the border, the text will also move. It also does one more thing that's important. It'll use this border as its actual border when we wrap the text, since that's the parent. Now we do want to change the anchor to this border. I've explained anchors before, but basically if you have a screen size change, the anchor is going to be where it's anchored to on your screen. We'll have it anchored to the bottom middle, and we'll change the alignment to above the anchor and then in the middle of the anchor here. So 0.5 X alignment and 1 for the Y alignment. Now when we resize, it'll resize perfectly anchored to the bottom. I'm going to use something like size 800 for X and 300 for the Y. And right now we have our border looking and designed pretty poorly. It's just a white box, but we can change that here under the Appearance tab. Under Brush, if you expand that, we'll have the option to change it to an image. Luckily, I do have a texture on my computer that I want to utilize for that. Once you've selected the image that you'd like to utilize for the border, go ahead and just click Open. That will import it to the engine. Or you can go ahead and just drag and drop the file from File Explorer. Now that we have this texture imported into the engine, we can go back to our widget, go to the image, and go ahead and just select the dialog border. And instantly it looks a lot better. What I'll do is include this image in the description down below in case you want to use it in your project. Right now our text is situated on the top left of the border. We'll go ahead and just change that to the middle and change its justification align text center. We do want it to auto wrap as well. Let's just change one more thing. The outline settings for the text, let's change it to 2. That's going to give it a nice black border. And actually one more thing, let's change the size to something like 40. Type in some sample text just so you know how it's going to align. Sample text. Now that we've set some sample text, you can change the padding here. That way it doesn't go over the black borders on the outside. If you change the padding from the left to something like 10, that will move the text box just a little bit to the right. Change the padding to something like 10 on the right, and you know what, let's just do 10 all the way around. That makes the text box just slightly smaller than the actual border. If for some reason you're having issues with the auto wrap text, you may want to change your horizontal alignment to align fill or align center, just to play around with that a little bit. I've found that a horizontally aligned fill is the better option in most cases. One last thing, we do want our text to be a variable so we can edit the text later on. All you have to do is click is variable here, give it a nice name like dialog text. And from the Designer tab, let's go to the graph so we can go ahead and set up just some simple coding for this. We will want one variable to our MPC blueprint, so go ahead and change this type to an MPC object reference. And for this variable type, we'll need it to be instance editable and expose on spawn. Very important to get that expose on spawn clicked. Now when we create this blueprint, which is going to be event construct, we are going to want to update the dialog. So let's get the dialog text and we'll set that text. Now what are we going to want to set that text to? We're going to want to take our incoming NPC and get their dialog variable and plug that right into here. So whatever we set our NPC's dialog to, it's going to convert all the way into this widget. And that's really all you'll have to do with the widget for now. Now with our player, we no longer want to print screen it. We do want the dialog to appear on screen with a widget. And I've found one of the best ways to do this is by setting it inside of the NPC itself rather than the player blueprint. Since the NPC is the one saying the dialogue, you kind of want him to be the one handling the dialogue widget. So we'll go ahead and create a function that we can call when we want the dialogue to appear on screen. And we'll call this show dialogue. Now when we want to show the dialogue, all we want to do is create a widget, which is the type of blueprint that this dialog is, so we can have it shown. We'll actually use that exact widget, the dialog widget, and since we exposed on spawn this NPC variable, we'll actually see it available to be set when we create this dialog widget. All we have to do is set this to ourself. We're going to want to promote this to a variable called dialog widget, and then we're just going to add that to the viewport. All this will happen every single time we show our dialogue, and that's going to happen when we overlap the capsule for our player. So we'll just show dialogue right here off of the NPC that we overlap. If we go ahead and play right now, you'll see that it does work. It goes ahead and adds the widget to the screen, but it adds an infinite amount of them, ultimately stacking on top of each other, and there's no way to get rid of them. So if I walk all the way to the corner, the dialogue stays. We do want the widget to disappear when we're no longer overlapping with our NPC blueprint. And this event here makes it very, very easy to do that. But before we can call this event, we'll actually need a variable that is our current NPC that put the widget up. So let's go ahead and promote the most recent instance of our overlapped NPC to a variable, and we'll call it current NPC. Now when we stop overlapping with an actor, we want to find out if that actor is equal to our current NPC. Go ahead and create a branch node to find out if the actor that we're no longer overlapping is our current NPC. So we're only going to want to get rid of the dialogue that's shown on screen if we're no longer overlapping the same NPC who gave us that dialogue in the first place. Let's say someone else walks in front of us, or we move forward and we're no longer overlapping with another NPC. We want to make sure that the person that we're no longer overlapping with is the NPC that gave us the dialogue to begin with. If it is, then we'll have a true output of hiding the dialogue. So we need one more function. And let's just duplicate show dialog. This is going to be hide dialog. And it's pretty easy on what we're going to do on hide dialog. All we're going to do is take our dialog widget and we're going to remove from parent. That's basically just going to destroy our dialog widget. And we'll go ahead and call that hide dialog when we stop overlapping with the same NPC that gave us the dialog to begin with. So if we play at this point, we can overlap. Once we stop overlapping, we no longer get the dialogue. With this setup, however, you may run into some issues if you overlap both of them at the same time, because two dialogues are stacking on top of each other, and it set our current NPC to another NPC, so we never actually get rid of that original dialogue. In order to prevent this, we need to check to see if our NPC is valid. Get current NPC, and we're just going to drag off of it, and we're going to say is valid. Now the is valid node is very helpful. In fact, it should have made our top 5 most common nodes and function video. Link to that up above. But basically what it does is it checks to see if this current NPC is actually set to a specific instance. If it's not, then it will go is not valid. If it is, it will go is valid. So it's kind of like a branch node, but instead of checking to see if it's equal to something, true or false, it's checking to see if it's valid or not valid. In this case, we only want to do something if our current NPC is not valid. And since we set our current NPC once we overlap with something, after we stop overlapping, that's when we'll want to set it to null again. If we don't do that, there is an issue because we'll set it once and then we'll go away and then we can never get another dialogue again because it's always set. And whenever we start overlapping, it'll say it's set, it's set, it's set. We'll just have to set it to it's not set anymore. If nothing's plugged in while you set a variable, it'll set it to null, which means it will no longer be valid. So now it doesn't matter that these two guys are near each other. It won't lock us, and I can quickly move back and forth, interacting with both of them very easily without any issues. Well, that's all good and fun, but our NPC only has one line of dialogue that we can change. We can set up a bunch of different variables for dialogue and have them go off of those, but I think a better method and something that you should start learning is using arrays. I know we've used them in previous videos, but in this video it's a simple way to just show off exactly what they can do. In order to change our dialogue variable to an array, we might actually have to get rid of our references really quickly, but we can change it from a single variable to an array. Go ahead and compile and save, and now we have an entire list texts that we can say. So we can number them. This is text 1, 2, text 3. But we're going to have to keep track of which index we're on, because we'll always start with the first index, then the second, then the third in our array of dialogues. So we'll need another variable to keep track of which index we want to be displayed. Let's create another variable and change it to a single variable, and we're just going to want this to be an integer, which is just a number. This is going to be called dialog index. And the default value of the dialog index is going to be 0, since we always want to start on the first index of dialog. If we go back to the dialog widget, this is where we set up which dialog is going to be set. We'll go ahead and get our NPC variable. We'll get the dialog variable as well, and then we're going to get a copy of that variable. It's going to ask us which index of the array that we want to get. We're going to get our dialog index and plug that right into here, and then that is what's going to be displayed. Now our dialog index number is going to need to increase every single time that we show dialog, otherwise we'll continue cycling the same dialog every time. For instance, if we play right now, we'll continue just showing the first dialog. If we go back to our NPC and go to show dialog, we can grab our dialog index, go ahead and set our dialog index to whatever it currently is, and increase it by 1. Go ahead and plug those in, and now every time we show our index, our dialog index number is going to go up by 1, so we'll show the next index the next time we show dialog. If we go ahead and play right now, you can see that it is working. However, if we go above the amount of dialogues that we have, it'll just begin showing blank text. And that's because our dialog index is going higher than the amount of dialogues that we actually have in our list, and it's not going back to 0. So what we'll need to do is get our list of dialogues and get the last index, which means that it's the last one in our list of dialogues, and we'll see if our current dialog index is greater than or equal to our last index. And we'll set up a branch from that. So if the index that we are currently on is the last index or somehow glitches out and is greater than the last index in our list of dialogues, then we'll want to set our dialog index to 0. So we'll go true, and if not, we're just going to increase to the next dialog, which will be false. Make that look a little bit neater. And if we go play at this point, should have this is text number 1, text 2, text 3, text 1, text 2, text 3. And of course, in the viewport, we can go ahead and click on our specific instance and change the text here since the variables are editable. So you can change those, and now he will say different things from the other one. And one of the nice things about instances is even if this instance is going to be on index number 2 or number 3, this instance will still have its own dialog index. And my interaction capsule seems to be a little thin. What I recommend to keep it more stable is increasing the radius for your interaction capsule. That way you don't have to be so pinpoint perfect when you are talking to these NPCs. Alright, so at this point you should have a third-person character that can interact with NPCs. The NPCs should have dialogue appearing on screen, and you should be able to edit how many dialogues they have and what the dialogues say using the details panel for each instance of the NPC.
Order now for the low price of 1 like, 1 subscribe, and 1 comment down below. We hope that you've learned something during this video. We are here to help you think like a game developer, so stick around for more videos like this.